Okay, in this video, this today, Sunday was the second Sunday after the yearly Hebrew Judgment Day, Yom Kippur, also known as Yom Teruah. And in this video, I want to talk about one or two of a couple of symbolic visions that I had that Sunday. And just for the sake of having fewer personal issues, there's one specific one that I don't really want to include in this video, because if it's accurate and if I get it right, even if I don't know that person's name, it's going to be probably a guarantee of far worse problems than what I already tend to have, because this is a small town. So one of my visions from yesterday, or two, I might not say it and just keep it to myself. So anyway, one of my visions, it had a television high up on a wall behind a man who's wearing a long t-shirt in multiple colors of the rainbow and a baseball cap in multiple colors of the rainbow and some baggy jeans. And television's like a play on words for tell-a-vision. And I'm not sure, but the man's clothing, maybe it might mean that he's secretly bisexual. But the rainbow colors were kind of toned down quite a bit. It was more like a more matte or pastel version of the whole rainbow thing. So it might mean he's secretly bisexual, or it might mean that he secretly has prophetic dreams like Joseph the dream interpreter. Like, I'm not sure which. It either means he's like Joseph the dream interpreter, or it means he's secretly bisexual on the down low and just kind of toning it down. And on the television, high up near the ceiling on a wall behind him, it looked like a category from the game show called Jeopardy. And the category in the Jeopardy style presentation was knives. And the word knives appeared twice in white letters, which, when you applying Book of Genesis chapter 40 and 41 symbolism, when you see something repeated more than once, and if it's an inanimate object or a harvested plant that's not still in the ground, then that denotes a number of days, not a number of years, if it's inanimate or a harvested plant. So knives written twice in a Jeopardy category, that meant 2 days. So I wasn't really sure what to make of that vision. So I just wrote down, made some notes for the manifestation day, which is going to begin in a few hours from now after sunrise. So anyhow, yesterday I just wasn't sure how to take the vision. And then, without warning, some bad news hit me. Without warning, while I was out trying to take care of some bills and some very, very super light groceries, because I don't eat a lot. I have 1.5 meals a day. It's one small meal plus a salad. So while I was doing my groceries, I got an unexpected call from my mother while I was at the store. And my mother was telling me that my brother is asking her to move out on the streets and she doesn't even know where she would go. You know, she has a lot of damages to her body from multiple car accidents. And she's really not physically sound enough to be working full time anywhere. And what I noticed is after she hit a certain age and all of her hair turned white, she stopped getting interviews for office jobs. Nobody interviews her for any office jobs anymore. You know, and personally in my past, I can count on one hand how many times I got interviewed for office jobs when I was younger, even though I had no history of bad behavior, no history of delinquency. I was an overachiever in school and whatnot, but you know, I just, in spite of all that, in spite of living my life trying to always do everything perfect and right, I can still count on one hand how many times I had interviews for office jobs when I was a lot younger. And my mother, she tended to do much better in that department through temp agencies. But once she hit a certain age, even the temp agencies were like, no. And I get it because she has a lot of physical issues and her memories not always so great. So when she called me yesterday, she was saying that even though she's got multiple damages from multiple car accidents and she's really not in a position to be able to fend for herself, my brother asked her to move out. And I was just totally surprised. Because even though he would bully my mother and threaten to kick her out a lot, I never thought he would actually do it. Like he used to do things like giving her no heat in winter and no AC in summer. Even though he had a really good paying job and low rent, he would still do that to her. And he would do things like keeping no groceries in the kitchen and making her wait until 9 o'clock at night for one meal. And my mom, she hasn't studied hard like I did, so she doesn't know how to properly do a keto diet without feeling weak and sick. And even though I know how to do it at this point, it took me like 2 years of study and practice to figure out how to do it without feeling weak and sick. It took me a long time to perfect it, even with the proper knowledge. And she doesn't have that. And he doesn't keep food in the house, even though he's making really good money. And this is the type of circumstances that my mom has lived with for years, many years, because my brother has always been financially more stable than me and better able to provide for her. And when I was with them, I was trying to help some, but I was having heart failure symptoms and my back problems were so much worse because I hadn't lost a lot of weight on the 1 meal a day diet yet. So I couldn't even sit up right for more than 30 minutes without getting swelling in just one leg and chest pains. That's how bad off I was physically with them before I started doing 1 meal a day, to get better mileage out of my back and my hips and to control the swelling in one leg and the chest pain that I used to have if I sat upright for more than half an hour. I was trying to help them. I just wasn't physically able to really help a whole lot when I was with them. And he was very, very, very hostile to me when I was there, and he would spend all his days off just bullying me. And so now here it is, like 2 years since I left my family, and now yesterday I'm being told that he's putting mom out now when she's not able to care for herself and not really sure where she's gonna go, just like what he did to me. And I'm starting to think that maybe my symbolic vision of the word knives written twice high up on the ceiling behind a man who either might be secretly bisexual but just toning it down, or maybe a dream interpreter. I'm kind of wondering, maybe it might mean toned down bisexuality. Maybe knives might be symbolic for my brother. Symbolically, it might be symbolic for my brother stabbing my mom in the back. Maybe my brother might be secretly bisexual, just like a black girl was telling me when I was in college and getting bullied and harassed at a black school. Where the doors, the hallway for the honors students, both ends were locked, and someone was unlocking those doors to let people in to the honors dorm to come bother me, trying to drag me into stuff. And they weren't supposed to be in there because they didn't live there and didn't have a key. But anyway, with that said, when I was in college, there was a girl telling me that, a girl with long red dreadlocks, she was telling me that my brother is probably bisexual and that my mom was probably jealous for some reasons because of how her own life turned out. Just back then, a long time ago. And now here it is many years later, and I'm having this vision, and I'm wondering if that symbolic vision that said knives and showing a man who maybe might be secretly gay, maybe it's about my brother. Maybe what that girl with the long dreadlocks told me many years ago might be true. Maybe he might be secretly messing with men. Maybe he's actually not as in high demand as what he wants people to believe, even though he's young and slim and handsome. Maybe he's not that high in demand with women. Maybe that's why he only messes with women who look like models. I don't know. But, Tuesday hasn't even started yet. And I'm thinking maybe the symbolic vision was about him, maybe it represented him stabbing mom in the back and trying to throw her out on the streets, knowing she's older with an unreliable memory and multiple damages from multiple car accidents. And my mom, she's never been an alcoholic and she's never been on drugs or anything. She had a situation in Indiana where a Mexican guy who lived in the same white neighborhood that she lived in, he hit her with a car intentionally. And she said that after he hit her with a car, he hit her car with his intentionally. And she said the police officer who came out to take the report on her neighbor hitting her car with his, she said the police officer refused to do a breathalyzer test to test her neighbor to see if he had been drinking. She said the police officer looked kind of flustered, refused to do the breathalyzer test on her neighbor who hit her car with his intentionally in the suburbs. And And they documented everything to make it look like it was her fault. The accident was her fault, to force her insurance to pay the Mexican guy. And that's just one of the multiple situations that my mother's been targeted for. And she's not a spiritual person like me. She's dealing with individuals who have targeted her. My brother, who's telling her she has to move out even though she got health problems and can't really fend for herself, and isn't getting interviews for office jobs and hasn't had one in years. He knows all this. And my brother, he has a very dark spirit within him, not just attached to him, but within him. He has a very, very dark spirit. And with the few girls he does date, one of them is from a bloodline that does a specific type of black magic. And I don't want to say the name of the type of black magic I heard him talking about on the phone, but it's a type of Asian black magic. And I'm not going to say what country it comes from because I had to look it up on Google, but I overheard him saying it on the phone. And I'm wondering if the entity in him might be from the fact that his girlfriend's bloodline is involved in that, or if maybe he's just like that as a result of just him being himself and being a not so kosher individual. I don't know what the origins of, or maybe it could have been from his lifestyle. I don't know what it is, but I already knew he had a dark spirit in him. And I was trying to warn Mom. I was trying to warn her and trying to tell her how to defend herself while she lives with my brother. Because even though he has a dark spirit in him, it's never really made an attempt to kill her. And it didn't make an attempt to kill me because we're not out there trying to forcibly drive it out of him or anything. So the risk of death hasn't really been super high. And that's how it is dealing with most people who have that kind of thing going on. And I'm not saying that all witches are evil. I'm not saying that, but when people like my mother are not able to see on some degree what they're dealing with spiritually, they don't get an opportunity to eventually realize that they're being targeted with the same type of problem over and over again. I don't want to be prejudiced. I don't want to be closed-minded, but eventually you get to a point where you realize it's a specific kind of element who's the ringleader in a lot of shit against you over and over and over again. And my mom is not yet at a point of recognizing and identifying that, and I don't even know if she ever will be. I even tested my brother one time using a trick with high-pitched bells. And I had some hidden speakers to play the sound of high-pitched bells, but on a very, very low volume. And what I noticed is when I triggered the hidden speakers to play the high-pitched bells, what happened is my brother stopped berating and threatening me, and he walked out of the kitchen. This is before I moved out. So when that happened, that right there told me that he definitely had an entity in him. I even saw one situation where he came down the stairs. He stood in front of the door, in the closet door in the living room, and he just stood there for a long time, staring down at his feet with his face against the door, not moving. And then he punched the door and then went back upstairs to his room. So when that happened, it's like the spirit inside my brother was threatening me, but without coming right out and saying it, just threatening in a quiet way so that no one would hear me scream if I got scared. And I don't scare easily. I just brushed it off and pretended like I don't see it. Like when people, and my brother, he doesn't have schizophrenia or anything like that. No, he's just straight up possessed. That's why I was able to drive him out of the kitchen with hidden speakers playing high-pitched bells when he would be trying to get revved up for accosting me with psychological and verbal abuse that just really kind of doesn't let up. And I should have been doing that, using that trick on other individuals. I don't know why I didn't use that more recently, like last year. But anyway, I've known for a long time that he's had that problem, and I kept trying to tell my mom to use the bell trick to try to defend herself and to make the verbal abuse and being accosted a little less intense. And being the kind of person she is, she probably ignored everything I was telling her about how to try to defend herself. And now she's in a situation where she's not physically sound enough to care for herself. She doesn't have a car, and he's asking her to move out. And I haven't made any attempt to try to drive that spirit out, because that kind of thing, it can get dangerous depending on what type of spirit it is and if it gets angry. I know where a lot of Christians, they'll think they're driving a spirit out and it's not gone. It's still right there in the house. It's still right there with the person. They're just not perceiving it. That's what happens with some Christians. Then you have other situations where they don't do things according to whatever their protocol is, and somebody dies. Like there's one story of a female pastor who had a group of people trying to do an exorcism, and they didn't know how to do it right. So they sent a woman home with her husband, and her husband grabbed her tongue, pulled her tongue out of her mouth, and killed her. And their children were safe because they had sent the children away to go stay with grandparents. And I know, like, a lot of times when Christians do exorcisms, a lot of them, they'll have a lot of struggle, a lot of back talk. Sometimes there's danger. Sometimes there's not. But there's always a lot of drama and pageantry, what I've noticed. But when Yeshua did exorcisms, there was no drama. There was no pageantry. What he said goes, basically. If he would tell some spirits to leave, they had to get the fuck out. There was no back talk, no drama, no nothing. When he did exorcisms, it was like, okay, you're going to get the fuck out now. Ain't no questioning, ain't no interrogating. Go somewhere else. And the Bible says that Yeshua taught that a spirit like that wanders in the dry places and then returns to the person that it lived in with 7 more spirits worse than itself, of finding its home clean and swept. So with that said, because probably no one has the original form of Judaism today, probably no one has the original Christianity from the original church today, a lot of people either don't even know the real name of Christ, and if they do know it, they sure as hell don't commit to it. So I know there's a lot lost. Even just basic things like the real name of Christ is lost at this point. I understand that. And I didn't want to interfere, and I didn't want to attempt anything based on research that might be compromised, because that can be dangerous depending on what kind of spirit that is. And I know that that spirit in my brother, that motherfucker's dangerous. You try to mess with that, he gonna fight back. And I'm not trying to be in a situation of trying to do something remotely at a distance, because if I do it based on the pageantry and the back talk, that normally tends to accompany modern exorcisms, I know there'd be a risk of danger to my mother who's in the house with them. I know there'd be a risk of even worse backlash on me than what I already tend to get, even though I'm not really interfering in anything spiritually. I'm not even interfering. All I do is talk, and the talk I do has been very, very, very limited, and even that got me an immense amount of backlash. So, because I only have research from a faith that's been very, very compromised for many generations, that's why I just told my mom to use the bell trick, that because that, and to be honest, that's the real reason why older churches have bells, because that's a convenient way to drive certain energies away without being openly confrontational and without the risk of endangering the people around you. So churches do it. Castles in Louisiana, sometimes they'll have like the whole ceiling covered in bells, from what I've been told. Not what I've been told, what I've heard on YouTube. I know Tibetan monks, they use bells. Like, there's even a lot of Western tribe Indians, they'll cover their jingle dress with bells for their dance in the grand entry. And I know what it's for, because I know that's what people use bells for, is to drive stuff away, but in a non-confrontational way that's kind of maybe a little safer for the crowd. I understand that, that's what the jingle dress of the Western tribes and the church bells and the Tibetan monks bells, I know that's what it's all for. And with that said, I think my mom has kind of put herself at a huge disadvantage by not using it, by not using the hidden speakers playing the sound of high-pitched bells trick. I know that because I know her well enough to know she probably didn't even fucking try to use it to defend herself, because she's been with my brother all these years and just tolerating that stuff from him and keeping it a secret and not telling anyone. And even if she had been more outspoken and told people, I know she probably would have just been attacked if she told people what was really wrong and how bad his behavior tends to be in private. They probably would have attacked her. Because when you live in a white community, you cannot say anything about anyone who has a lot of friends and who's accepted in the community. Even if what you're saying is true, even if it's not exaggerated, you can't say anything, because even if it's a black man who has a lot of friends accepted in the community, you can't say anything about him either if there's a problem with him doing a lot of real ugly stuff in secret, because you get attacked and have people trying to undermine your entire life and, have them trying to build up this whole history, trying to make you look like you're crazy when really you're being tortured by a lot of different people. That's the reality of life in a white community. And if my mom was living in the neighborhood of my deceased grandmother, she would have more freedom to actually say what's really wrong with living with my brother. If she was in my deceased grandma's neighborhood, people would actually listen to her and side with her, because for one, she grew up there. For another thing, they accept her as a real, actual Black person, and they're not going to bully her. And for another thing, you know, elders are respected. You know, she's an elder being accosted by a young person. So that alone would probably have people horrified and taken aback. They'd be like, oh my God, you're an elder. How is he, is he insane treating you like that? So if it was in a Black community, my mom could literally say or do anything, and whether it's right or wrong, and she would still come first in all things because she's an elder. That's how it tends to work in a Black community. And unfortunately, she kind of exploited Black people's tendency to do that when I was younger. She did. She exploited that really badly in some very detrimental ways. And now that she's older and vulnerable and can't defend herself, now she has this son. He got a spiritual issue at work. And she's surrounded by people she didn't grow up with, who's not from her culture, who I believe would probably fill her files with crazy shit everywhere she goes and torture her emotionally, socially, and financially if she says anything about the verbal abuse, the bullying, and the spiritual problems from living with my brother. All the bad things people tend to not see in public. Like, since my brother has a lot of friends in that white community and he has some status there, it could really hurt her if she says anything. And since she's not using my advice on how to defend herself spiritually in the ways that I did before I moved out, like, I guess her only choice is to move out. But where's she gonna go? She says she has friends who might take her in, but I don't really know if that's going to be reliable for her, because most people tend to be so aggressive and territorial, and then a lot of the shelters were already full before people started busing in thousands of Mexicans, and that's a whole different story right there with Mexicans, because the fact of the matter is, like I said before, my mother, she's descended from Asiatic natives who were darker skinned people from the darker skinned tribes that looked more like Negroes and that were just labeled a bunch of niggers. My mom's descended from them through multiple tribes. My mom, she's also descended from the Black people who built the North and South American pyramids. And, her ancestry is not solely, fully just slaves. There's other stuff there too. And what really worries me is that a lot of people are going to feel entitled and emboldened to try to treat people like my mother and people like my father like second-class citizens, like foreigners who deserve to come last or not at all, and who, who should, they're going to feel emboldened to treat people like my mother and my father who have the same type of ancestry like it'd be karmically okay to put them on the chopping block and to treat them like foreigners who should come last or not at all in their own ancestral territories. That's my worry. And I know that with all the extensive food shortages throughout America, and also in a worse version throughout the world outside of America, and with so many people being bussed in right now from other places that tend to treat the darker skinned, unmixed Indians like they're shit and like they're half African and foreigners when they're not. I'm really worried that with that demographic flooding in, my people, are, a lot of them are probably not going to make it without some kind of divine intervention that's the kind that really works and that's on a higher level. You know, because everybody's already been brainwashed to see people like my mother, who comes from both bloodlines, and my father, who comes from both bloodlines. Everybody's already been brainwashed to see them as a bunch of foreigners who should go back to Africa. You know, they come from the Black Pyramid builders, and they come from the darker skinned Asiatic tribes who look less like Spaniards and less like Europeans. They both come from that through multiple tribes. They're not solely just descended from slaves. You know, there's a lot of stuff going on there, even though my parents don't look like it. And my mother, she's in so much danger right now. And I know in the past she exploited having the freedom to be respected as an elder and to be held to no accountability, whether right or wrong, in a Black community. I understand that, but because she's my mother, I'm not holding a grudge against her for that stuff in the past. And now, with all these years in the suburbs, she's in a position where she has no authority. She has no freedom to tell the truth about what's really happening to her without getting attacked or sent to, or being locked up or sent to a mental hospital or whatever, or having crazy shit piled up in files and records everywhere she goes. She don't, you know, that's the backlash, and she don't have the freedom nor the authority socially to speak up without having that kind of stuff happen, because she's in a white suburban community and been in one for years. So, you know, I'm just really worried that with this, with the shortages being ongoing long term, and with people busing in all these mestizos from Mexico who tend to keep all the dark skinned Indians who's working in the fields and outside of, and basically doing manual labor, basically. I mean, they racist as hell, to put it bluntly. And I'm bilingual. I'm fluent in Spanish, so I have the real scoop. But, you know, these people who tend to oppress the darker skinned Indians who are not mixed with Spaniard European heavily, they oppress their own who's not heavily mixed. You know, even in California, it was nothing to see most of the darker skinned natives just basically doing manual jobs and working in the fields picking food. And I met one nurse where, you know, she was closer to my color. So she wasn't real dark like an unmixed Indian. She was closer to my color instead of being dark like unmixed people. And she told me that she would have died if she didn't have her sister to take care of her for 3 years, because even though she finished nursing school and did well, none of the other Mexicans would give her a job. And that she says she probably would have been on the streets or dead if she didn't have her sister to take care of her for 3 years until she could find a job as a nurse. You know, and she told me that they say that they're all Mexicans and they're all the same, but it's not true. And on the news, when they talk about busing thousands of Mexicans across the border right now into the areas where most of the shelters were already full, and I know because I traveled and I went personally, so I know. I'm thinking it might be these more oppressive Mexicans who tend to crowd the darker skinned Indios who's my color or a lot darker due to not being mixed. I think people tend to oppress the Indios. They might make up the majority of the type of Mexicans that's being bussed in by the thousands right now. That's what I suspect. And just from what I saw briefly in a 2-second clip of 2 people getting off the bus, it looks to me like they're bussing in the lighter skinned ones who's my color or lighter. that tends to just not allow the real dark-skinned, unmixed Indians to have jobs, like the nurse I met in Texas, like a really short married woman in jail because some other lady wanted her husband and her home and her life, and that she couldn't really get help because she couldn't speak English. And I was talking to her in the jail, and I was there because I was there on some false charge for things I've never done in my life that someone just pulled out of their ass. So I know what type of oppression the Mexican women have been under because of the mixed mestizos who's my color or lighter. I know what's really going on with them because I've been there and I'm fluent in their language. And my mother, I know that it's really a risky move to be trying to leave my brother right now, because going to a friend might be very risky and difficult because people tend to be very territorial at times. Not sometimes, a lot of times. A lot of people tend to be so territorial and aggressive. It's not solely just a problem in the white community, with the territorial aggressive behavior. And then on top of that, she's saying she wants to try to go to a shelter, but I traveled and went personally to a lot of shelters, including in that sanctuary city where they're busting in thousands of Mexicans right now. And when I was there, all the shelters in a lot of major cities were already full. I saw it. And my mom, she's talking about trying to go to one, and there might not be a shelter to go to. And I told her, and even though I know my mother still has this fairy tale in her mind that, life is supposed to magically be better for me because, I'm light skinned. I don't look like a biracial person. I don't look like a woman of non-color in my face. I don't have the social privilege of having a mother of non-color. I don't look like a woman of non-color in my face. I don't have this magical fairy tale privilege she's always seemed to throw in my face and bully me for in the past. And even though I know that the relationship might be strained because of her heavily ingrained beliefs that might not change, I still told her that if she needs help, my lease will allow her to stay for at least 15 days. But I told her just straight up, I told her if she tries to stay in my community, there might be problems because of the type of work that I was attempting to do in regard to my spiritual calling. And even though there was like 100 vultures landing in front of Fairfield Family Medical on the second, 2 weeks after Yom Kippur last year, and even though there were other types of events, because I'm not the same race as the neighborhood I'm living in, I had a lot of problems, which included people banging on my bed trying to keep me awake all night, and before I found an apartment, and like 100 other things. 100 other things I'm not going to get into right now, but I told my mom, worst case scenario, she could try to come here and maybe I could try to help her. But my money's very, very tight now that I have a home, and I don't know if she can stay for more than 15 days on my lease. And I know what it is to live in a white community, and I'm not white, and I'm not extremely passive, and part of my calling is to speak on certain things. Do I have all the answers? Do I have it all fully together? No, I really don't. But I do know that's part of what I'm supposed to be doing. And I've had multiple ministries to tell me this in the past, people who never even met me before. And because I was making an attempt to act on my calling in the past, I know that by default, my mom is going to have problems if she comes here. She's either going to have problems, or if she goes back to bullying or emotionally abusing me, she'll have 100 people standing with her trying to do that. It's going to go one way or the other. If she treats me well, she's going to have problems. If she turns on me, she might have a lot of allies to help her to do that. And then if she ever shows anything more than passive agreement and calmly speaks up on any problems, then her ass is probably going to be homeless again. I mean, that's the gist of it. That's what people do. They do this in white communities. And if you're Black and if they don't really genuinely see you as one of their people, then they do that to you in a Black community too, like what happened to me and one of my female cousins who went to college with me. And she had it just a tiny bit worse than I did because she had long, silky hair down to her waist. And they went to her dorm room and stole her jacket and broke her radio and was doing things to keep her up all night, not allowing her to sleep. You know, similar to what happened to me when I was in a shelter here in the white community. So in the Black community, when me and my cousin were being bullied and harassed in school, I think it was just a tiny bit worse for her, but because she took her mother's advice and said nothing about what was really happening to her in reality a lot, she was allowed to stay and allowed to graduate. But me, because I reported to administrators and I tried to defend myself and I made police reports, because I tried to speak up about what was happening to me, I was kicked out of school and my scholarships were stripped. And that's kind of like the unwritten, unspoken rule of living in a white community or a Black community. You know, like you're okay until just one person decides to do some crazy shit to you and to act as a ringleader. And all it takes is one person. And once they get a whole group of people around them, then you got all these records that's exaggerated or false. You know, you got them doing crazy shit like keeping you up all night, not allowing you to sleep, you know, with calls on the phone or banging on your bed, you know, verbally abusing you a lot, gang stalking, you know, stuff like that, where if you speak up and tell the truth about what they're really doing, then that's it. What little you do have, they take it away. That's what happens. You know, or they try to have you, they make up some shit and have you arrested. They shit you never said or did, or they'll put a lot of crazy shit you never said or did in your files. And I know in a Mexican community, I had a doctor to sit down with me with the door closed without his nurse present. And in the file in his hand, he had copies of all the crazy shit that the women in the office at his job were putting in my files. You know, this is not in Ohio, it's in California. And when he gave me a copy of that file with all the crazy shit that the office workers and nurses at his job was putting in my files, he told me, I know you never said or did any of this shit. Like, I've been here with you the whole time. I know you didn't do any of these things. And my doctor, he said, when these women, they do these kinds of things, no one makes them stop. He said, no one ever makes them stop. And your only option is to try to run and leave town and find a safe place. And he said, I'm your doctor, and even I can't help you. And in response, I told him, I know, and I understand what you're revealing to me. And I told him that this is not a limited problem and that it's done to thousands of women all over the country. I told him I know. And, women from my ethnicity, American Black women who are not recent immigrants from Africa, we're like less than 12% of the population. And we're in so much danger right now with the world being under so much strain and with America being under a little strain. We're in so much danger right now, even though it's not us running around breeding like ants and using up most of the government assistance. It's not us doing it. It's never been us doing it. We're less than 12% of the population. And then on top of that, you got the added combination of the fact that we're descended from the Black, like well, a lot of us, like people like me and my mom, we're descended from multiple different Asiatic descent tribes, like the Seminoles, Canadian Beothuk, Chowan, Meherrin, Iroquois, all that, Muskogee. We're descended from multiple Asiatic tribes, but we're also descended from the Black people who built the 70 pyramids in Ohio, who built all kind of pyramids through North and South America. And our people did that. We're not solely just descendants of slaves. And so already we're in a lot of danger, like most of the Black women from our ethnic background, even though we're less than 12% of the population. And now we're being looked at as foreigners who should be on the chopping block. We got mestizos who oppress their own people, who are more Indio and very dark skinned and not mixed. They oppress them financially in their careers most of the time, even when they have higher education. And then they come here and they got the freedom to do the same shit. And now they're coming in by the thousands. And I know it's probably them coming in by the thousands and not the same people who they oppress before they get here. Financially, verbally, socially, everything. And I lived among them at one time. I experienced the abuse, and I've had a lot of people to confide in me. People with college education who spoke English, people with no college education who couldn't speak English. I know the true extent of how bad it's been for them and their children living surrounded by those mestizos who have oppressed them and intentionally crowded them out of a lot of shit. The stuff that was done to me when I lived there, oh my God, it was horrific. It was a nightmare. And now I'm looking at like, okay, well, I'm surrounded by all these people who want to treat me like a foreigner in my own ancestral homeland, where I come from both sides, both bloodlines of the Americas through both of my parents, through 4 different tribes of Canada, Florida, North Carolina, different places, that's who I come from. And I'm like, where do I go? I know I'm not really, I know what could possibly happen to me in a Black community. I know what could possibly happen or get worse in a white community. I know what the challenges would be in a Latino community, and how bad and dangerous it tends to be for a lot of Indios. And for people like me and my mother who come from both types of indigenous bloodlines in our diverse background, we got all these people looking at us like we're pure Africans, especially my mom because she's dark skinned. And I'm like, what happens to us? A lot of women like us, they're losing their homes right now. A lot of them, they got nobody to turn to right now. What are we supposed to do? And then, like, it's like the only real path to any degree of stability or safety. It seems to me like the only real path is just some kind of divine intervention, and the level of divine intervention that we need, I don't think it's going to come from the African religions of the same people who sold women and children in exchange for alcohol and tobacco and sold prisoners of war and cursed their bloodlines. I know that the divine intervention that we really need, maybe it's not going to come from the religion of those people. The divine intervention that we really need, I don't think it's going to come from a form of Christianity or a form of Judaism that nobody even really fully and completely has anymore. It might, maybe, but I mean, the proof is in the pudding. Look at what's still happening now and continually getting worse as things are slowly intensifying. It's a lot of people, they don't even know Christ's real name, and if they do know it, they don't commit to it. So the erasure of a lot of things spiritually and culturally, it's real deep. It's real deep and real intensive. And I'm just like, what do we do?